Okay, so evening everybody and welcome to the Royal List for May. I'm delighted to welcome Sacha Macey from Yurts For Life, who served for a few years in the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers before going on to have a very interesting career across a number of industries. And what characterises Sacha, who I've known as a personal friend for several years, is her entrepreneurship, and that when she turns her hand to something, it happens. And I think that's true of an awful lot of veterans. And I think it's probably one of the qualities that most stands out amongst the military community. I'm very pleased that Sacha's finally agreed to do this for me and for us. And what I'd like to do is to go through a little bit of her service history, a little bit of the things she's done along the way, and then we'll talk a little bit about the business she runs now and the challenges it brings and how her military background has helped and where it hasn't helped in that enterprise. So Sacha, thank you very much for joining us from the heart of Yurts For Life.
Absolute pleasure.
So if we get warmed up by just talking a little bit about your army career and tell us a little bit about your background, if you would.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was quite short. I managed 5 years in the regulars in the REME with a 2-year gap, and then did 5 years TA with the REME as well, or reserves rather. After a year at Sandhurst, I then went on to 4 Battalion based in Borden. Crikey, I was just remembering where that was. Then went on to regimental headquarters, where I was the core pin-up. Basically, you go around and recruit around all the universities and all the cadets and trying to persuade everyone to join the REME. When you're up against the Royal Engineers and the Royal Signals, and sort of that was the height of mobile phones coming out, and obviously in the Royal Engineers you can build bridges and blow stuff up. Trying to make REME sexy required a lot of drinking in the bars at the unis and having a lot of fun, taking them on lots of trips, surfing in Cornwall, skiing in the Alps, that sort of thing. So did a year of that, and then spent my final 2 years back at 4 Battalion, where I was the training officer for the last bit of my career. But just before that, I was the forward A platoon commander. So basically specialised in heavy tanks, Challenger 2 and Warrior, and ran that platoon and the vehicle and general platoon as well, and sort of oversaw at one stage the power plant platoon. So man management across 3 or 4 different workshops, all the guys doing slightly different things, keeping an eye on stuff and making things happen.
Yeah, and then you decided to move on from there, and through a couple of hoops you found yourself a couple of times going to hotel management. How on earth did that come about?
Well, after I left the army, I actually drove to Bulgaria with my then partner. We left the army together and we got into property development abroad. And we went to Bulgaria. We met this property developer guy through a TV show, because we signed up for a TV show, and it actually really helped with our sales. We sold loads of properties. It was actually called Property Developing Abroad, funny enough, on Channel 5. Mum and Dad were upset it wasn't the BBC, but you try. But through that we met the presenter was a property developer, and I ended up leaving the company out in Bulgaria. The partnership with the guy I was with didn't work, and I came back to the UK, and this guy, the TV presenter, said, "Sash, you're out of work. What are you going to do?" And he said, "I've got a project for you." I was like, "Okay, can you go and refurbish and then open and run my hotel in Portugal?" I was like, "Yeah, no worries. I'll go and do that. No problem." Didn't have a clue. Obviously, I'd stayed in a hotel before. Had a bit of an idea that there was a front of house, a reception, laundry, housekeeping, a bar, a restaurant, and obviously events and weddings. I've been to a few weddings. So I figured I could pretty much work it out, and applied my can do. Yes, I can do it. I'll figure it all out later. So that's how I got into the hotel side of things. And I did that role as an interim manager for about 9 months, combining it with my TA career. So I used to fly back to the UK every 4th weekend and go and do REME cadet weekends, which was quite interesting, quite a diverse sort of way of living for a while. But that's how I got into it.
And do you think there were some values you brought to that? I mean, did you find that apart from the can do, yeah, I'll do it, though I've got no clue, which I think is pretty striking. Was there anything else that you think, well, actually, now looking back on it, I was able to do that because of the way I'd operated beforehand? Or
yeah, I think the army experience gives you 1 up, 2 up, which is actually pretty handy. If you know what you need to achieve and you know the impact you need to have, and you're given, my parameters in terms of trying to figure out my course of action were based on finance and time. So I had no money, no time, and I had to make it happen. So by hook or by crook, you break down each problem that you have into a number of steps and figure it out. So I think that sort of basic training that we had from the army days really helped to do that.
So then you got properly ambitious and got into commissioning airports or air terminals anyway. Was that another, oh yeah, I can do that, or did you have to work a bit harder to get that role?
No, it was actually a very much a yep, I can do that, I can give you a hand. I was doing another job out in London after being in Portugal doing the hotel. Kind of like an admin role for an ex-army friend of mine who just needed a hand doing things. I hadn't really settled. I hadn't figured out what I really wanted to do, but I was open just to saying yes. So when you do that and these opportunities come up, you just say yes and you get on with it and you figure it out as you go. Before I joined the army an eon ago, my first job out of graduation, I graduated in electronic and electrical engineering. I got a job with Arup and Partners, who are one of the world's most brilliant engineering consultancy companies. God knows how they got me in there. They normally recruit from people who are sort of Oxbridge or Bristol at the lower end. And I was like a 2-2 out of Birmingham, but I think I managed to talk my way in. But I kept in touch. I think that was a big part of what I've learned from there and from being in the army. It's just keeping in touch with your network. I kept in touch with Arup, even though I'd been through the army, 8-9 years later. I was chatting with one of my friends who was based in Dubai at the time, and he was just complaining about his job, that they were trying to open Terminal 3 out there, and it was just turning into an absolute nightmare. Terminal 5 at Heathrow had just opened, and it was an absolute shocker. The baggage went wrong and it was all over the news. It was world news in the airport industry and in normal news, particularly in the UK. And the sheikh who ran the airport development company, Emirates Airlines, and had all the money, was stamping his feet, getting pretty upset about the situation, that it was going to be delayed. And it's all about how you're perceived on the global stage in Dubai. It has to be amazing and on time and perfect. And the consultancy team who were out there were really struggling. And I said, well, I'll come and help you. And he got me a job straight away as a contractor. And I was out there for another 9-month contract, basically running trials. So very much like a military exercise. I had 5,000 people turn up on one day, and I gave each of them a little script. And, it was Mr. and Mrs. Jones. They were traveling from, Baghdad to Dubai on the overnight trip. And they've got 20 bags, 7 chickens, 5 kids and a dog. They're late. And we're stress testing the airport, from its infrastructure, from the people who are going to work there, their training, making sure all the systems worked, all the IT systems talk to each other properly, and all the gates and all the FIDs and bids, so the display systems all worked and stuff. So I think probably because of my technical background and yes, I can do it, that kind of got me through that job.
So when you look back on that, and that's obviously quite a high pressure role, there's a lot of other people's money involved in that. When you look back at that, what were the things that went well, or more interestingly, what didn't, that you think, well, I've learned from that?
Knowing that I remember the one thing that went really badly wrong was we got to the end of this one trial and we hadn't organised for enough goodie bags for all the trial participants to walk away with a little bag of stuff. And we're talking, you know, one of those squashy stress ball things and a ruler and a branded this, that and the other. I mean, it was nothing particularly special, but I think they put it over on the radio for everyone to come and volunteer. You will get a goodie bag if you show up. And it's a chance for Dubai airports to show off to the local community, but everyone wanted their goodie bag. We ran out and it was chaos. People were like running in, grabbing bags. I mean, I've never seen anything like it, just for basically a bag of just branded stuff, not particularly special. So I think never underestimate what you think, you know, when it comes to the general public. Just like, crikey, 5,000 people just wanted their goodie bag. They weren't.
Yeah, that applies everywhere, doesn't it? I mean, we've all been on tours that don't count unless you've got the T-shirt. So
oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. So that bit I learned, you know, always look after everyone from that perspective. I think what went well was brokering a conversation between the Emiratis and the consultancy team. The consultancy team when I got there were really struggling with the sort of Middle East and West sort of communication. It just wasn't working. And I think this is something that the Army taught me, is that you've just got to go in humble and, you know, strike up that conversation somehow, find some common ground. I ended up going smoking shisha with one of the head of the operations, slightly wary of this because I'm, you know, female, he's male. It's a very different culture out there, but made the necessary precautions, had a couple of mates on speed dial just in case. But it opened up the conversation. You know, we started to talk about his family, you know, what he likes to do outside work. And then the next day he's like, oh, Sash, should we go down and do some shisha? And I'm, oh yeah, okay, John, you're coming with me. I was like, why don't you bring Ahmed with you? You know, so then there was 4 of us. And then eventually we just broke down all these barriers of guys walking around with their dish dashes on, and then, you know, all the Westerners being a bit uptight. And it was interesting because we were given a book on how to understand the culture. And we were told, you know, when you first arrived, read this book. This is everything you need to know. And it was absolute rubbish. You just need to remember they were human beings and talk to them like they were your friends. And we all became good friends. We all went bowling one evening, both teams. It was brilliant. And it got rid of all the rubbish. And suddenly stuff started happening during the day at work, which was great.
Yeah, well, that's looking after people, we're always told, but actually managing to do it is a different thing after all. So so after you'd organised 5,000 people but only a few thousand goodie bags, you then started organising projects with next to no people. Tell us a bit about the Antarctic project.
So in the nature of always saying yes to stuff, because you've got to be open to opportunities when you're not quite sure what you want to do, I was very lucky and met Robert Swan, who, if we argue who did what when, he was the first guy to walk to both poles and Everest. No, both poles. Fiennes was the guy who did both poles and Everest. God, I can't get that wrong. But in the polar world, that's quite a big deal, as you can well imagine. And I'm sure people on this call have met those kinds of people before. Single-minded, dogged, kind of crazy, all at the same time, because you've got to be slightly out there to be able to decide to go and do that. Rob's sort of story was that he'd never even been camping before, let alone walked a long way overnight, and decided to go on a polar expedition to the South Pole. So yeah, met him and joined his team and became his sort of right-hand person to deliver expeditions out to Antarctica, out to the peninsula. And in the year that I was able to work with him we had 2 trips out to Antarctica. One that was sponsored by BP Alternative Energy, just before BP shut down that division. A lady called Vivian Cox ran the whole division, the first female CEO within BP, just striving and driving for climate change and trying to change within. And she battled hard, and her song was like, right, BP, I'm taking all these people to the Antarctic. And she took 60 young people between the ages of 18 and 25. She did an international competition where you had to apply to get on this trip, and say why you were the right person to go and do that trip. It was incredible. So yeah, I did that for a year, and just an incredible opportunity, just amazing.
So so you went on the trips as well, obviously.
Yeah, so the actual trip that we did weren't specifically to the South Pole. It was a trip on an icebreaker down to the peninsula. We do day landings on the ribs. We did 2 overnights in tents. And then each time we were back on the boat, sort of following the coast down, we would do these seminars with all the youngsters talking about how they could make an impact as an individual and how they could change people's perception of climate change. Watching an ice sort of carving, an iceberg sort of coming out of the land, puts things into perspective when you're thinking about how that's getting warmer and how things are changing. It was pretty cool.
So so those few examples of what you've done are so eclectic, and they're just madly different from each other, and also marked by being relatively short projects that you've done, you know, amongst others, I know. So now you've been running Yurts for Life for a few years, which is a surprise to all of us who know you, that you've not that you've stuck it because you're good at it, but that you've stayed in one place.
Yeah.
But tell us how you came to buy the business, because that's quite a big undertaking, and very different from being recruited into a project and just saying, yeah, I can do it.
Well, I just finished working at Terminal 2 at London Heathrow, because when you open one terminal somewhere, you suddenly get known to be an expert in opening airports. So I got recruited by the same company, Arup, to go back and help with opening the Queen's Terminal. We finished that in the May of 2014. After that project, I was knackered. And I decided to go back home to my parents who live in Cornwall, just to have a few months off for the summer. So I still kept my flat in London, which is where I was living at the time, and just decided to take the summer off because I'd earned enough cash from that project to see me through for a bit, where I didn't have to go and get my next job. And I stopped off on a date in Totnes, if you can believe it, and ended up spending a few weeks down there, met up with some friends who lived there too, and just hung out for a few weeks before getting to Cornwall. And, you know, over conversations that you have in pubs with friends, it's sort of, well, what are you going to do next? I'm like, well, I'm going to go to Cornwall and probably set up my own business. I feel ready now to do my own thing. I'd quite like to have a little bit of command and control over my own destiny, rather than worrying where I'm going to get the next paycheck from through the next job being a contractor. And one of the guys in the group was like, well, there's a yurt company that's about to close, that's just, you know, in the next village. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't really know what a yurt was. So, you know, chatting with my parents, chatting with friends, like, well, if you're half interested, go and have a look at it. Don't just talk about it, you know, do something. Because I was sort of umming and ahhing and being very vague. I think I was just tired, not my usual self. And ended up approaching the guy. And I said, well, I hear your business is closing. What's the score? And then he went into sales mode. I was like, oh God, here we go. Wangled a night in a yurt because I thought I'd better try before I buy. And then, yeah, by August the 13th, I'd signed a contract saying I was going to buy it. I felt that there was something really incredible about the structure. And it's age old, you know, it's been going 3,000 years. It's quite cool. It's amazing when you sleep and chill out in a round space, how much better you feel. This is the hippie in me, than you do if you live in a box. Of course, we all live in boxes because it's cheaper to make boxes than it is to make circular things. So that intrigued me. Obviously, I'm an engineer at heart. I know I'm pretty logical. I can do my step by step. I get structural engineering calcs, the basic ones. So that sort of held me in good stead. And in the way that my mind works, I was like, well, actually, I can do this. There's a section of people who make the wood. There's a section of people who do the canvas. And there's an HQ section who run the business. I've worked for enough businesses. I must be able to figure this out. I can read a profit and loss. So I'm sketchy on a balance sheet, but I knew the basics. I've never bought a company before, and I probably made every mistake in the book. So if anyone ever needs to buy a company at some stage, I can certainly give you some top tips on what not to do. And I've subsequently learnt through doing some business courses on how to do it. And I should have really bought the company for about £1, but I paid about 15,000 for it. I effectively bought the equipment and the designs and promised to keep the existing staff on, keep them employed. And that was the deal. Yeah. And then I took over properly on the 15th of September. So we had a 4-week handover where the guy I bought it off just showed me the ropes and then left.
That's quick.
Yes. Well, God knows why I agreed to that. I must have been on such a high for doing such a nuts thing. I was like, yeah, no problem, I can do this. I found out about 1.5 years later, after my canvas company that I used to buy all my canvas roofs from and all the canvas covers from, they told me that the person I bought the company of had gone round to see them after this month and went, ha ha ha, I haven't told Sacha hardly anything. She'll be employing me back as a consultant within the week. But I didn't call him because there was no way I was going to call him. So I spent the first 6 months learning how to make a yurt and really understanding it. Cost quite a lot of money, but nothing like being chucked in the deep end to figure it out. And I made my first sale in the April 2015. So it was a good 9 months or so before we made the first sale. When someone tells you, when they sell you their business, that there are 70 hot leads and they're all going to become sales, I don't believe them. I emailed every single one, phoned every single one, and not one of them came off. It was unbelievable. Yeah. But live and learn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, but just going back at the beginning of that story, you said that you felt ready that summer to set up your own business.
Yes.
Though I don't think. Well, you didn't. It obviously wasn't going to be yurts. But what was it that made you think, this is the time? This is, apart from independence, but what was it about the stage you're at in your life, or things you've done that made you think, right, it's time? Why did you want to do that?
I think I'd worked for all the possible types of businesses I could have worked for. So I'd worked for small businesses like the leadership expedition to Antarctica. That was a small business, but I had big impact. But I didn't have command and control of the whole thing. But I had impact up to a point until Rob was like, no, Sash, that's daft. We're not going to do that. We're going to do this. So I'd had that sort of tussle where I'm almost in charge, but not, if you know what I mean. I'd worked for corporates. I'd worked for charity. I'd worked for all the different sort of sizes of business as well. So I felt that I had a really good understanding of the mechanics of pretty much how things work. I was very aware that finance is my Achilles heel, because with all the training you get in the army, you don't get, budgets don't really matter. You're given a flick of 250 million quid's worth of tanks to look after in the REME, but in reality, it's an accountability of missing a part. You don't actually get charged financially for losing it. You just get a big bollocking and sort of, I don't think that was what it was like then. It might have changed now. So I knew that I wanted to sort of create my own course, I think. And I think that the contracting world had got a bit tiresome, always chasing the next job, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned that finance was your Achilles heel, and I know because we were friends at the time that you had some genuine sleepless nights in the first year or so, or perhaps subsequent to that. And it's taken a long time to get you to the very successful position you're in now. For those who are considering setting up or buying a business, what are the things that did cause you the sleepless nights?
I think understanding how to cash flow forecast, huge, absolutely huge. We naturally do it with our own budgets at home. I've got this much money, I'm going to get my fuel and my food, and you buy clothes or whatever you buy. I think you can kind of handle that. But when you've got so many things going in and out. I mean, we make the yurts, so it's manufacturing. We've got to buy a load of stuff to make these yurts, and we've got to deliver these yurts on time. The money coming in for these yurts, I get 50% up front and I get 50% at the end. But I've got to buy all the materials and pay all the staff to make that yurt with that 50% effectively, which can't be done. The profit margins aren't that big. So I've got to make sure I've got enough cash in the bank to be able to tide me over to that second 50%. And when you start off from the bottom, which is where I started when I bought this business, I didn't realize what disarray it was in until I was in it. I didn't have the backup or the cash to just railroad myself into a position where I was able just to bankroll myself to the next deposit. So I had to be really, really careful. I learned a lot of that from when I was in Bulgaria doing the property development stuff, because that's quite key, where you've got big lumps of cash coming in and you've got massive outgoings to pay builders, making sure you've got enough in the tank just for the everyday, keeping everything going. It's a real skill. I still haven't got my head around it completely, and I've been doing yurts now for 6.5 years, but I'm getting much better at it.
And you've also got much better at the strategy and the running of the business, and it's much less of a roller coaster ride than it was in the early days. And you've obviously got some big contracts now that obviously are stabilizing for the business. But you talked about that first sale you made. I mean, that's obviously a huge moment for you. Tell us a bit about that and how you felt when that happened. Oh,
it's still probably the most nuts sale I've made. I got a phone call on the Monday from this chap, and he said he's a proper East Ender, and he worked for this lady who used to be the owner of the open top bus companies, the maroon and cream ones, and they went global through an investor actually from Dubai. I think it was Dubai. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And she bought this beautiful farm in Kent, and because of the Arab sort of side of her business world, she really liked sort of the tent idea, and then she decided on the yurt. We make a Kyrgyz yurt, which is from Kyrgyzstan in terms of the style. It's got steam bent ribs. Yurts are normally related to the Mongolian style yurt, which is actually a ger, if you want to get technical about it, has straight ribs. Bit of yurt knowledge for you. But this lady decided she wanted a yurt to chill out in, so she could watch and chill out with all her dogs. She'd rescued 15 dogs from stray dogs from Spain and brought them up into Kent to this massive farm, and they ran all around this beautiful farm. It's gorgeous. And this guy phoned me on the Monday. He said, "Sash, you need to get up here with all your bits and bobs and show us your yurt, show us your photos, and bring up some samples." And we were chatting through that week. I hopped in the car on the Friday, got there at lunchtime, basically did the sale, drove back, and the money, I had 10 grand in my bank account on Monday morning. And I was like, flipping heck, if this is what I've got to do to make every yurt sale, this is insane. But it was a huge high, absolutely huge. We actually went above and beyond, and I got a local artist here who I'd only just met, because I didn't even live in Devon. I live in Cornwall in London. I don't know Devon at all. So I was starting my life in Devon and in the county. I didn't know anybody really. But I met this artist who between myself and the client and her, we managed to write in Arabic all the names of her dogs around the roof of the yurt in gold leaf. Who would have thought? I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it was bonkers, but it was incredible first sale.
It's very, very cool. That is very cool. So in all the stories you've told us, your ability to get on with people and to maintain what we now call the network is really shining through what you see. And you are, and I know you to be very much a people person. And that's really fundamental to who you are as an individual, but also clearly as a businesswoman. What other values do you think that you have, and how much of that has come from a foundation in in platoon or workshop command, and what else have you, what's the difference between what you've got from the military and what you've sort of built on subsequently?
Good question. I would say a lot of, particularly in the early days, a lot of the initial sales and success has come from me being really open and honest and giving my word. I think a lot of people in business will say something to get the sale, and it can be utter codswallop. And I think I've been, quite straightforward with people. I've been doing this a year. The company's been going for 5 years, but I've been doing this 1 year. We're growing. The yurt's going to be delayed by a week. I'm really sorry. I hope that's okay. Yep, Sash, that's fine. Don't worry about it. I've been worrying that I've not been able to deliver it on time because I've given my word that I'm going to deliver it on time. And if it's been delayed, I've actually said, this is why it's delayed. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And I said, look, I'd rather compromise the timings than compromise on quality. So I think giving my word and saying that I'll do what I'll say I'm going to do has really held me in good stead. An example of that, again, is there's a pub near us called the Cot Inn. It's been going since the 13th century. Beautiful place. And they were looking for a canvas wall with some windows in it for their outdoor kitchen, which is now, over the pandemic, it's been serving them very well. But at the time, it was like, ooh, outdoor kitchen, this is new. And I remember Mark phoning me and he said, right, Sash, when can you come over? I was like, I'll be there tomorrow. I was there at 10 o'clock when I said I would be. And once we'd looked around it, I said, yeah, we can definitely do that. I'll get my guy to come and measure up on Friday at 11 o'clock. My guy was there Friday at 11 o'clock. Once we'd measured up, I then sent him a quote and I said, I can have this delivered to you on this day. And we delivered it on the day that I predicted we would be able to do it on. And his feedback was like, flipping heck, no one in Devon does anything when they say they're going to do it. It's always late, always delayed. So I think just that, being reliable and saying you're going to do something and you do it. And if something goes wrong, then just being open about it and just saying we're going to be late because of X, Y, and Z. And people have been brilliant.
Yeah. So when you look back now over your 6.5 years of manufacturing yurts, what are the big things that of Studio in Good Stead? What are the lessons you've learned of as a business owner and a very hands-on day-to-day leader of your business?
I think lessons learned, on the people side, I thought I was good at people and I could recognize a good egg when you see one and meet one. And I'd probably say 95% of the time, my gut's pretty good. But I'm also quite, I'm trying to think of the right way of describing this. I probably always see the good in people or want to see the good in people. And I've hired a couple of shockers, absolute shockers, that have caused me more stress than any other problem that I've had, apart from the financial one where we didn't have a lot of money at the beginning. But subsequent to that, getting the wrong people in when you're small has such a big impact on the day-to-day running of the business, because if they are remotely toxic and they get in, it can completely decimate any sort of team or culture that you might have. And I generally thought, oh, I can do team, I can do culture, I've done it before. It's so different to how you do it in the army up to a point. But because obviously you've got rank and structure to support you, and you've got a massive support structure of, the family's officer and the padre and your boss and, your colleagues. It's just me trying to figure this out and look after people and make sure they're good. And where I let myself down is that I didn't go to the nth degree of checking references and getting more advice or spending longer in the recruitment process, getting other people to interview the candidates, apart from myself and apart from people within the business, getting an outsider to come in who knows me, knows my business, to interview them as well. And I think if I'd done that for 2 particular people, I would have caused myself less headaches because I wouldn't have hired them.
So even when you're owning your own business, and by nature that's got to be a competitive enterprise, you still would have served yourself better by using external advisors more, and using your network to support you. And
Definitely. And I don't mean that in terms of going to a recruitment consultant either. I haven't had particularly great experiences with local recruitment agencies down in Devon. And I think you have to work alongside a recruitment agency for a long time to get that level of trust, so they really understand what you do. If you want a quick hire, don't go to a recruitment agency. It's better to go to your network and find a trusted friend who gets you and gets your business, and they can be your sort of confirmatory check for your at the final stage. I think, yeah, if I'd done that before, I think I would have been in less strife.
Wow. I'm going to offer people the opportunity to ask questions in a moment, because there's so much more we could do. But what I just wanted to do now is just sum up a couple of things that I've picked out, and that we might go on for. The first is your can-do attitude, which you talked about yourself, which I think what you've just told us is perhaps was a bit too can-do in a couple of cases, but has broadly served you well. And I think that's something I think society recognises, that the type of people who go into the forces and are recruited are the type of people who have that anyway. And then I think it's reinforced. And I think it's, and the way you've described it, it's generally a positive. What I haven't heard before from people on the Royal List is talking about the value of the 1-up and the 2-up. And that's quite interesting to hear, because I mean, you're talking more about when you were working for large organizations, but really understanding the intent of who's employing you and why they've employed you as an individual, and what they really want you to do is really, really important. A lot of people talk about in business, saying, yes, I can do it, and then working out how. And when you're doing that at someone else's risk, that's very different from when you're doing it at your own risk. And I think you've given us a window into what the differences there are. It's a bit more real when you're doing it at your own risk. But I think that the most interesting thing to me, and the thing I'd like to bring out for other people, is just how valuable the network is in terms of maintaining friendships or contacts from way back when, your first work experience, that came back to give you really valuable and interesting experiences, but also effectively the next level of your professional development is clearly invaluable. And if you don't keep those relationships live in some way, then those opportunities aren't there. And people talk about it through resettlement. You need to develop your network. And I always say to people, use the military network, because it's so broad, full of people who have gone on to weird, wonderful, interesting things. And everybody who's left the forces knows that there are challenges. Some people find them extremely difficult, and some people are able to walk into things. But at some point, everybody needs someone else. And it's the greatest club there, the military network. And from your military network, you can then build out to another network, or go back to, as you did, those people you've known. But using the network is really, really important. And finally, I'm really interested in your description about trust and being reliable. But that's the next level from that, is trust. And if people trust you, you work with other people who you trust. If that's the basis of your relationships, that clearly develops where you're going. That's fascinating, Sacha, as I knew it would be. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
So what I've just